Ah, yes. How you preparing for your first race?
How are you? Yeah, well, everyone's preparing. Everybody's had it. They're all prepared. It's March 27th. Year. It's 2025. Welcome aboard, everybody. You listen to the Crushing Iron podcast. This is episode 841.
Yeah, there's a lot more people racing nowadays. I can kind of feel. I bet a lot of first-time situations, and I remember how nervous I was when I started the sport.
God, dude. I was a disaster.
Disaster.
I was. Well, I mean, technically, my first Iron Kids race was in 1987, but I distinctly remember my very first triathlon ever. It was on Hilton Head Island. It was the Beach Bum Triathlon. I was living there at the time, and it was straight up on a beach. I mean, I was training for it. I did in this. God, what year is this? This is 2000 and good dear Lord, this is 2003. So this is 2 decades ago. So I was living there, was training. It was not training. I was in pretty good shape. And they had the Beach Bum Tri. It was all on, if you've ever been to Hilton Head, like it's got the best sand for like beach running because it's the beach is so wide and it's compact because the tide comes up so big or so high that it really compacts. You can ride on the beach and it's a perfect 13.1 from end to end. I was like, I'm training for this. I was doing stationary bike at the gym, which, as we all know, like those saddles are like 6 foot wide with like a 3 foot wide front, like on the nose, and it's just totally uncomfortable. So I'm working all day, and then I'm either running home. So about a month out from the race, I was like, I'd finally saved up enough money to buy my first tri bike. So I go over to the old Go Tri Sports on Hilton Head Island. I think this will have a few of these in Charleston, Bluffton, like on the East Coast. And Al was working there. I think Al still owns these shops, actually. And I bought my very first tri bike. It was a red felt S32. And I thought it was the most badass piece of machinery I've ever bought in my entire life. And now, like, if you like, it has less. Looking back on it, it has. I think it was $1,600 or $1,800 at the time. Can't even buy a freaking kid's bike for that anymore. And so I got it. The swim was open water swim in the ocean. The bike was on the beach, and then the run was on the trail. And I had a great swim. It's the second time on the tri bike, and it's on the beach. I got my skinny ass tires pumped up to like 130 psi. And I swear to God, it took me 2.5 minutes to clip in while I was like gliding. And then you're just hammered. I couldn't even get an Aero because you're on the beach. Like no one wants to be an Aero on the beach. And I was the only idiot on a tri bike on the beach. Like this is absolutely idiotic. Did it, hopped off, and then ran. I think I ended up like 3rd or 4th in my age group, but I got like a coconut trophy. And then after that, the rest is history. The rest, yeah. So over 2 decades ago was my first one. A lot of learnings between that one and now. But yeah, that was my very, very first one. And then I did an Olympic distance. I did like a sprint distance at the J in Nashville, like over like the Belmead area. And then my first 70.3 ever was Gulf Coast 70.3. My first full was Ironman Florida, and that was in 2005. Or yeah, so God, it's been a really long time in this sport. But yeah, that was my I was a nervous wreck. I didn't know. I thought I knew everything. I was training with a chrono and working off like a sheet of paper. And I remember I got a heart rate monitor, like the Timex Ironmen, who have obviously been in bed together for a very long time. They had this like really pimped out package with like the Ironman watch, and then that had heart rate on it. And I was like, oh, this is the jam. I can do my heart rate training. You're on your bike. You're on like a Cyclops trainer, which still are like the most indestructible trainers. Like you have all these people having problems with these smart trainers, and all you really need is the old Cyclops smart trainer, the kinetic, and you're good to go. And beyond there, just pedaling away on the road to nowhere, and no power, just heart rate. Training for my first one. But yeah, that was it's been a long time. But yeah, I was pretty nervous for all 3 of those. What was your first one? Music City?
Oh yeah, Music City Sprint. That was before I met you.
Yeah.
And
the Cumberland?
Yeah, and the Cumberland River, and that, it was a big flow day. I think they shortened it from like 400 yards to 300 or 500 to 4 or whatever. I don't remember, but I do remember it was like I was swimming for my life. like for, and I, you know, like I think I had, I don't remember, I can't remember the distance, but the swim was like 6 minutes. But I just remember it was pedal to the metal. I got out just absolutely feeling like I was going to die. And, yeah, then I had a decent ride. The thing I remember most about that race was when coming out of the portal with the first, tri kit I ever wore on and how stupid I felt. And had a good race. I got done, took pictures and everything. And one of my buddies was like, man, you look happier than you've looked in years after that. And I was like, because I was always into, like, you know, I don't know, music and art and shit like that. And I still am, but like in my core, I think was, you know, athletics and just moving. And that is the thing that kind of keeps me happiest in that. And then, but the only other, I mean, then I think I did Olympic after that. But my tri bike I bought off Craigslist, still have it, and I'm thinking about riding it this year still. And that was in, what year was that? 2013, yeah.
2013, yeah.
Yeah, I bought that thing. I went out to some shady parks, met some dude, and he's like, yeah, this is it. And it's like really one of those weird situations of Craigslist. And he changed it. I didn't have shoes or anything, so he changed it and put on flat pedals, and I rode it around. It felt like shit forever, and then I finally got used to it, and now I still love it, and I might ride it again.
Is it an alu or is it carbon?
It's aluminum.
That's what I thought. Yeah, it's silver, silver, black, and red.
Yeah, it's the old silver, black, and red Speed Concept from Trek. I don't know, man. I've still ride it once. I've rode it a little bit last year. It's just always been, I don't know, a sweet spot for me.
Yeah,
comfort wise.
Yeah, well, and if it fits, it fits. I mean, I think that's, before we launch into the topic for today, but that's like one of the biggest issues you see all the time as a coach. Like, athletes want a new bike, or justifiably so, like feel like they need a new bike, and they always go with the brand they feel like they like and want, and then the color or paint job they want, and they really don't ever look at like fit coordinates, and they end up like making huge mistakes when it comes to buying bikes. As it fits terrible, they can't adjust the pads, and if they want to adjust the pads, they got to invest like another $1,500 in a cockpit to make an adjustment. And if you're not comfortable on your bike, it does not matter. It doesn't matter. And it's funny, like, and this is maybe a good segue into like you were talking for the cast, like the things we've learned over, you know, getting close to a decade of coaching and multiple decades in the sport for me. And it's funny, like, because I remember when I first got into coaching and I started working with these guys, like back then, talking about just like cockpits in general. Well, now it's like, how high can you get it and how much can you hide your head? Like, how high can you get your hands? That's like the new rage. You've got you know, extensions that like are molded to, you know, your underarm. Now they're making like extra long extensions to make you go really, really, really far in front of you, keep your hands high, and they're like molded. Well, back then, I remember I got these like 3T Aero bars that were carbon. The extensions were straight. And it was how low, like, you know, looking at Sebastian Kienle, like way back, he was like basically, you know, his nipples and his belly button were facing the pavement. Like, he was in so low and so stretched out that it was all about how low can you go, how little of a stack can you have. That's the most aerodynamic, you know, PSI in your tires, 120, 125, 130. That's the fastest, you know, that you need to be. And now you look at it, now it's like, how high can we get our hands? And like your hands completely low is terrible. And then it's basically how low PSI can you get in our tires for better rolling resistance. And it's just like, do we, you don't even need, you know, tubes. They've gone tubeless. You got mechanical, you got, you know, electronic shifting. It's really just kind of wild to see the evolution. You got shoes that are so insanely fast. It's unbelievable. You know, wetsuits have come a long way. You know, everything has. And so it's just like going back and thinking through, like, I remember power meters are inexpensive. They're on trainers now. I remember the very first power meter I ever came across was an SRM, and like it had more wires than a cable company install. I mean, it was all over the bike. There was, you know, terrible aerodynamics, but you had a power meter. I mean, it was insane expensive. It was a huge head unit, came off the front of your bike. If you don't know what those are, you should look them up because they were giant. It came off the front of your bike, and they were super expensive, like $2,000. But yeah, it's just funny to see like how much the sport has changed in obviously like the science and the gear and the equipment and the bikes. And obviously the shoes is another big one. Some portion hasn't really increased, but like also on, from a coaching standpoint, thinking back through the long period of time and all the ebbs and flows you've seen in training, you go through all the phases of it's about, it's all easy volume, and then it's all, then it's, easy volume, a little bit of intensity, and then it's all about, quality versus quantity. And then you got, polarized training, you have pyramidal training, and then it was, the Norwegian method, and there was lactate testing. Now we're all the way back to zone 2 training again. And it's just, there's so many. And the funny thing is, right, is even like going back to the early 2000s when I started dabbling into coaching, or like the mid 2000s, was all this stuff has been around for decades. Yes, it's been like you can dial in a little more, the scientific approach, and you can obviously accumulate and, collect more data because of the amount of metrics and devices we have now compared to then. But if you look back on, like some of the bigger training weeks, like they were doing these a long time. They were doing sheer volume. They were doing a lot of zone 2 work. They were doing, and then you had some people doing a lot of less volume. You got age groupers now. They're doing more volume than some of the pros were way back then. Then you also have some of the pros now that are so much faster than the pros then that are doing about half the training. And it's just a good reminder, I think, that, especially as a coach, because I do think that there's, there's a happy medium within coaching. And I think you have to be really conscious of the lens in which you're consuming information, because on one end, you have a lot of coaches out there that they get a weekend certification or they've done a few races and all of a sudden they consider themselves a coach and they know it, but they don't do any additional reading and research, or it's their way. They get their USAT certification or their Ironman U or whatever it is. And that's a certification, and that's how good I'm going to be at, X, Y, and Z. And that's what I'm always going to do. But then you've got, the other end of the spectrum, and you can consume all the information all the time from every single resource imaginable, the good, the bad, the ugly, professional athletes, coaches, sports science, research papers. And then you can just change things every other day because you also get caught up in the newest trend. And so you have to be really careful as a coach, like when you see and you read and you hear about these ebbs and flows, and it's a lot like fashion. What's old is new again, right? Pretty much all the time. Like things circulate. First we're making phones as tiny as possible. That was a new rage, and now they're like freaking giant again. Like we just ebb. It's like whatever. If something is new, it's gonna be marketable because it's different, and we all like things that are different because we like to buy things, like things to be changed, things to change. So, and look, when it comes to training, it's just interesting to go back and like look through. I mean, I still use some of like the very, very first sessions that I ever created in Training Peaks. There's like, over 1,000 workouts and training blocks in there. And if I go back and look at some of the best training blocks or the best workouts, not a lot of it is different. It's just called something different, or it's pre-built in Training Peaks, but a lot of it's really the same. And I find myself going back to a lot of those, years in the early times, like, hey, like, this really, really worked. This doesn't work. This works better, but everything is kind of called the same. It's just marketed different. And, you've got so many success stories from athletes who, go with, lower heart rate training and a very polarized method and they go hard. You got people who do, a lot of stuff in the gray zone. Sometimes they see success like early on, then they fade out. You've got big volume, you got little volume, you've got, you got to have intensity. Now you've got, how you want to differentiate training males versus females. How do you add in, when do you add in strength training? Like, how are you going to add that in? And then what kind of strength, like it's the strength training, another one. Like when I got into the sport, everyone recommended high reps, low weight, because that was the most similar to what you were going to do with a race, right? It's a long distance. And then now the science is basically the opposite and says, if you're going to lift, you should lift pretty heavy and, low reps, high weight, because it's great for running economy and short-term power. And, I think swimming is probably the one that's been like the most unchanged, because really because it's such a raw sport and there's really no extra. We know the distance, we know the pace. We just need a clock, we need a swimsuit or goggles and a cap, and we're off and running. The training with that I think is pretty much stayed the same, but cycling and running and how you put it together, even nutrition, right? You've gone in phases where it's been, high carb has been or lots of carbohydrates has been a thing. And then you got low carb was a thing. And now we're back to snorting sugar packets every 2 seconds. And then I'm sure we'll go back to maybe a moderate approach. It's funny to watch the ebb and flow of and I think it's probably mostly the world we live in now where everything is so consumable. Right? There's so much information. There's so many. You can just you can hop on Spotify and search a topic, that you want to listen to. And there's 19 different podcasts from 19 different people, on there. And a lot of times that goes with, confirmation bias. Like if you think something is true, then you are going to search for something out that's going to make it, valid. Like if you're a person who believes that, the highest carbohydrate intake possible is the best thing for you, you're going to search for those podcasts and you're listening and be like, see, I knew that was right, versus the other direction. Same thing goes if you think, hey, I think this is ridiculous, I don't think it's very healthy. You're not going to search out the opposite. It's a lot like politics and religion. Like no one really is open for learning. They're just open for reaffirmation of what they currently believe. And the same thing goes with training, like what they think. It's about, confirmation bias. And then it's also about, I think, as coaches, you can get caught up in reading a ton of research and reading new papers, but a lot of that stuff is frankly you should take it with a grain of salt, because not every, but most scientific research and papers and studies that come out have an agenda. Again, they're looking for a X result. And a lot of times you can read it and you can say, hey, while this is true in what I'm reading, scientifically, this is not what I'm seeing in my own experience. And I think as a coach, for the coaches listening out there, the self-coach athlete, like to me, that is the lens in which you should always have the most clarity and the most confidence in is what have you experienced yourself in your own training? Or as a coach, what have you experienced with the athletes that you worked with, and what has worked and what has not? Because you generally have the biggest and the best sample size, right? Not a 8-week study protocol that was geared to find something specific on a certain selected group of people. You have, like me, I've got a decade of time coaching with hundreds and hundreds of athletes in different age ranges and different, times, periods in their life and different abilities and different, that they're successful here and there. So I think when it comes to having a good lens and what you're developing for yourself, or you're developing for other people, it's, your experience, is to have confidence in your own experience and what you see within people, not what you hear and read all the time. Be willing to adapt, but don't be willing to turn on a dime without doing kind of your own due diligence to see if it's worth your time.
Well, I'm going to, I guess, go back to that place where you were talking about how you still like to use some of the original workouts and how they're more effective, some of the training blocks. Some of my best training still comes off of those old training plans that you built back in, 2012 or whatever, probably, or those workouts. Because, I mean, when you said the differences, they're kind of the same, but they're pre-built or whatever. But one of the things I always used to get out of that was I would have to look at it and think about it and kind of figure out what it meant. And now, like, if you just jump on the bike and you got do workout, and it's like, okay, what is it? And then it just sort of comes at you and you do it. But I think what it does, to me at least, is takes out the thoughtfulness of it, or the humanness, in the sense of, like, I know what I'm doing, but I don't necessarily think about the entire process and maybe how this will translate to the race or what my terrain will be and all these kind of things. So back when we were in Nashville, a lot of times, we had the Natchez Trace, which is obviously super hilly. It's a great place to ride, and we used to ride it all the time, and we would ride it hard. And then, there's a lot of hills to run around there. And all I did was run up these hills, and it wasn't always like perfect. And I never had power. I just always went by feel. And, just did what effort. I mean, it was always about effort and thinking about it. And I would always do things like analogize a hill or whatever and try to think about the course I was doing and how I would handle it. And, like build those types of things into my brain. And now it's just like with all the tech, and I think, it is what it is. It can be a good assistant, but like the overkill of tech sometimes. I mean, this whole world is kind of moving towards this transhumanism thing where things are done for us and everything like that. And I think there's definitely advantages in a lot of ways. But the reality sometimes comes back to, like, I always look at an athlete and I'm like, okay, here's what we're doing. I'm going to support you. I'm going to give you, thoughts and, basically, give you my input based on how I've seen hundreds of athletes go about this before. It comes down to the athlete, so like what, because the new stuff is exciting, I think, just temporarily a lot of times, I got this new thing or whatever. But the reality is you have to be able to create a genuine passion and desire for what you're going towards rather than some kind of like, Instagram story every day. You know what I mean? It's got to be like really kind of baked into who you are as an athlete, as a person, and what your agendas are and your goals. And those are the things that I really try to find with athletes. It's sort of like, what are we doing here? What's the purpose? I told you before the cast, I was like, my perspective has changed personally, but I know back when I started this thing, it was on me and I was working a lot harder, right? So I was getting better results. And then over time, I figured out what was important was understanding things. And like, I really learned, I never did endurance. So I learned what pacing was all about, right? I understood what pacing was at some point. And then I was like, okay, now I got pacing. So now I'll just try to, outsmart this race. But my work ethic went down over the last, several years. And it's just interesting because, I think the best athletes can combine all that, right? So it's like you understand what's going on. You understand pacing. You really understand your body, but you work hard in smart enough ways to, attack the actual, training plan and the race you're going to do. And you understand what's going on, but you also put in the work. So it's always about the work. There's always this thing, I didn't really want to do this. I didn't want to do this today. That's like the comment you get a lot. I'm sure you get those all the time. So, but I did it and it felt great. So that used to be kind of my mentality, is like, I hardly ever wanted to do it, but I would always do it. And now it's like, I don't want to do it. And sometimes more often than not, I don't, or I put it off or whatever. And then I become, I'm like, I could be the guy that has 6 bikes on Sunday, And, so, but I think that there's that. I mean, at the core for all that though, is like, why, what's going on here? What are you doing this for? And, are you looking for cheap, thrills along the way with new equipment and all these kind of things? Or are you trying to build your body and be stronger over time and be a better racer? So, to me, the nuance of all this stuff is about the person and what they want, and do they have what it takes, and are they willing to go through what it takes to get there? Or are they're taking sort of a different route and just kind of being a triathlete because they're a triathlete?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I, kind of objectively look at, from a coach, what the most difficult thing is or has been over the last 3 to 4 years, it's been probably patience. And especially if you got in the sport as early as I did, as early as you did, when there wasn't as much tech, I fully agree that there is a benefit, right? There is a positive in the amount of information that we can gather. Having said that, for a lot of especially age group athletes, they're unable to fully train in a way I think that is probably the best for them, because they feel insecure or unguided if the workout isn't pre-built and they don't have a specific range. I mean, I know like there's still some coaches that only coach off RPE. And I mean, I was just listening to a podcast from that was talking for another female athlete, and all she does is train by effort on the bike. And she got a power meter, and she said she's a pro. She's won Ironman race. She's legit. She's one of the strongest cyclists the female cyclists out there, and she got a power meter for a few days, and then because it came on the bike that she got, and then she took it off because it was causing her too much like mental anguish. And if I could program, like, if that's the ideal scenario for an athlete, because again, like, I get more questions now off pre-guided workouts that basically tell you how to do everything. I mean, I was looking at, a week earlier, like, swim sets are laid out super detailed. Bike workouts, you just start and it tells you what power to hold in a range, and then it laps for you. Same thing with runs. It's like you're totally catered. Like, what kind of question can you have for this? Like, I get more questions now with more specifics than I ever did with being more general.
Mm.
Go out and run aerobic. Okay. Go out and run, and do 20 minutes, easy, 20 minutes moderate, 20 minutes hard. Well, okay. Because that's easy. Your body and your mind and your lungs and your legs know what hard feels like. But now we've become so detached from even understanding what those kind of workouts are that we don't know. So we need more specifics because we have no idea what feels like what. So, all right, you said tempo, but like, what pace is that? It's an effort. I know, but what kind of effort? What's it supposed to feel like? Oh my gosh, we don't know what it's supposed to feel like. Like, so the perfect setup for me, honestly, would be for an athlete to be able to trust an athlete enough and have them trust themselves enough to do swims and rides and runs with a watch that collected all the data, but to only do the workout based on effort. I mean, and sometimes I'll build workouts for cycling that are strictly effort based. And then I get a lot of complaints like, hey, this bike isn't uploading to Zwift because it's I'm not sure why. It's because it's an RPE. Like, I'm expecting you just to like use your brain and your body, its connection, and tell you what feels like what, and then to go. Because that's what you do when you race. That's what you have to do when you race. And so there's a huge giant disconnect in what we're capable of doing and what we actually are doing. And it's funny, like I think athletes get frustrated sometimes, like, hey, well, I need more guidance. I'm like, no, like, we have to learn how to do this on our own. You have to learn how to build on your own. You have to learn what easy, recovery, moderate, your heart monitor doesn't work and you're just flustered because you don't know how to run, or your GP, or you forgot your watch and you don't really want to swim, or my power meter is not working, so I don't really know how to push. Like, you got to be able to do these things on your own and see what it feels like. You should be able to hop on a track and run 2 laps, at a certain effort and guess within 10 seconds and be able to pace it perfectly. And that's just, you just don't see it anymore. And that's not the best way. And again, I'm not saying the data isn't useful because it's super useful, but what I would love to see again is like, hey, do this at this. I just think we over specify things, and it's honestly, I know we rant on this all the time, but like, I've never had an athlete race blind and not have an incredible experience that transcended what they were capable of doing. So if you can do that in a race and it's that fulfilling and you get that much of a bump and you're like, I never would have done that had I had a watch. Well, then why aren't we training like that? So yeah, again, like, if I could program some might say like, hey, swimming, because that's how I program swimming. Like, it should feel like this, boom, 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 do it, because it's the least technical of all the sports, and they just do it. And I had another athlete that was like, hey, I stopped taking my watch to the pool, and I just went off, the clock or anything, because I was getting too much in my head. Like, that's the same thing. Like, you think you can do one thing, but your body's telling, and that goes both ways, right? It goes with feeling great and feeling like shit. Like, I had an athlete do a retest on his bike, and I think he didn't go hard enough because he thought he needed to be a certain way. He just crushed it this last time. And while I think he is significantly improved in his cycling, and the numbers show that, part of me is also like, well, maybe you just underperformed in that first one, and then you just appropriately performed in this one. So maybe I haven't programmed as well as we think we have, because we don't know. So you got one day and moderate feels like moderate, hard feels like hard, and it's going to be different, but you also don't get discouraged. And I think that's the, the difficulty I think we find ourselves in is we've become to, especially like, now versus before, like if I had a run, I didn't even go by cadence. Like I remember the big year work I did training for Ironman Arizona going. So like I did Ironman Florida in 2005 or 6 or something like that. And I did a 13, I don't know, 30, my first one I did like 1330, 1340. And then the next year I did Muncie. It had my first, like, I think sub 5, and then went in Arizona, did a 1030. And when I was looking back on my training for that, I didn't even, it was just, 6 by 5 minutes, 10 by 2 minutes, big gear, no power range, no cadence. I just knew what big gear was supposed to be. Big gear was supposed to be grind it out. Could be 45 one day, could be 70 one day.
Well, wait, if it's 70, coach, that's too fast.
I know, right?
I mean, come on.
Am I not, I just want to make sure I'm doing it correctly. I'm like, these are things that and again, like, I think we've also gotten so specific in what we do in that as coaches, like when we pre-build things, like you're not requiring a lot of thinking. And that's a problem. Like, yes, athletes don't want to think, but to a huge degree, they need to be able to think for themselves, because that's what's going to be required on race day, to be able to feel it out and to be able to race not with restraint, but what your body has that day. And so again, like I think if I could, plan out the perfect person's week, it would look something like this, like, swim, warm up 300 to 400, 10 50s build on 20 seconds. And then main set is 10 200s, tempo, on a rivet. Like it's not all out, but it's not lazy. It's just really strong and solid, on 20 seconds rest, cool down 200. The next day's bike might be, bike, warm up easy for 20 minutes. What do you mean easy? What zone? I mean easy. I know, but what range? I mean easy. And then I want you to do 30 by 1 minute, big gear on, 1 minute on, 1 minute off. That's it. And then cool down easy. And then I want you to run later in the day, and I want you to run 35 minutes aerobic. And then the next day I want you to do, on a run, I want you to warm up for 30 minutes, do a few strides. How many? For how long? And what pace? Like, no, just do a few strides, open things up. And then I want you to do, find a hill, run up it solid, and then run easy back. And then finish out for about 45, 50 minutes. And then later in the day, we'll do a long set. We'll do some pull and some pull buoy. The next day, we'll do an hour and a half ride at aerobic. And then so on and so on. And like, again, like, and then, or I want like a negative split run. And, like that's, and then you do that. And then I look at, because here's the thing, right? When we look at honesty, and we look at real numbers that are raw. I think that's the only way to get them. And I really do, because I think so many athletes are so disassociated from what feels like what, and also they cannot hide their expectations, and they also see these numbers as absolute, right? So as a coach, if I'm trying to appropriately measure, right? Let's say, I'm training you and you're in a build up for, a 70.3 or a full, and we're on our final block, and we're measuring fatigue, right, is the most important thing, and I've got you set for, on the one hand, we're living in 2025, and I've got you doing 2 times, I got you doing 10 times 2 minutes, big gear, and then 1 minute threshold regular cadence, and I give you a watt range. Well, if you go into it and you see the watt range, you think, all right, I should be able to do these because coach prescribed them, even though they're wide ranges, but you're really not feeling well. And so you can barely hit the bottom of the ranges, but you hit above the range because that's just who you are, because you want to do it well and you want to get your workout green. Well, then the intensity and the interval and the intent of the session is now higher than it really was. Like you overexerted yourself, just to meet the range. And let's say you're too busy, like a lot of athletes are, and you don't want to leave a comment. And so I just look at it and I'm thinking, all right, well, he nailed the session. Heart rate looked fine. Legs looked fine. Because you can't see how much effort it took. Like if you've got really deep muscle soreness, you can grind your way through. You might see a slight change in the cadence just because you might have to grind out a little bit more. and keeping your heart rate down, or if you raise the cadence up, your heart rate's going to come up a little bit just to meet the demands of it. But if you don't comment on it, and a lot of athletes are just like that, I have no idea. It's just going to pop up green, like, oh, he felt pretty good today. On the flip side, if I said, all right, Mike, I want you to do warm up easy, 15 to 20 minutes. And then when you're ready, I want 10 minutes, I want 10 times 2 minutes at big gear and then a minute at threshold. And then you do the workout. And I go back and look, and maybe I compare it to the previous week, or I compare it to what we have your zone set at. And, I see, oh, well, that was a really high workout. He just fucking crushed it. Heart rate was low, power's really high, and you don't comment. I'm like, dude, he felt really, really good. Or if you performed less than stellar, and big gear, maybe your cadence was higher because you don't have you had deep muscle soreness from another session, and so your cadence has to be higher, because the higher our cadence is, the easier it is to produce power. So in order to keep some kind of power, you raise your cadence up and power's a little bit down. Then I'll know that you don't feel that good. And so it really is a true test of where you really are and what your body, the signals your body are really telling you. And it's not letting your expectations and your assumptions and your desire to meet the demands of the day or to meet the session that you're in, like, it just gets so clouded. And so again, like, while I think data is great, I think it really hurts people sometimes. Like, I had an athlete who's very, very high level, top 10 overall in 70.3s, wins her age group. And she basically just said, like, hey, I like these repeat workouts, and I love repeat workouts because I think they're easier to execute for the athlete. Like, it's always easier to execute something the second time you do it. But at the same time, it also, we talked about this on Tuesday about, building your week and stress and fatigue, is it also allows the perfect opportunity to have expectations, because you've already done this workout and I can see exactly what I did the week before. And so if I average 185 on these 3 intervals the week before, then I got to do at least 185 today, if not more, because that's what, quote unquote, getting better looks like. But that's not true, right? Because you've got fatigue and you've got, other things going on. You've got different stressors, different environmental factors. Are we outside? Are we inside? Like, all these things are different. So I think it wears on people mentally. And that's why I think it's so freeing, like, to have, and you usually see this when you go out on a run, you just go out and you don't check your watch, and you go out and run aerobic and you get done. There's literally nothing wrong, like nothing negative you can take from that. You were able to breathe through your nose the majority of the time. The succession was a massive success, regardless of what the pace was, regardless of what the heart rate was. And now we know, all right, well, you ran today and you ran aerobically. And so again, like, it'd be great if we could do that, but we can't, because we've become so enslaved to having our tech to tell us everything, to give us affirmation, to give us confirmation, to tell us we're doing better, instead of, like a more simplistic approach. And yeah, you need it on the back end, and it's great to have that number and that data point at the end of it. But yeah, it's just a really hard thing to disassociate from. And I really wish we could do it more. And I think as a coach, we should probably press athletes to do it by feel. But at the same time, a lot of time, and I know this as a coach, I know you do too, like, it's funny because, like, building a workout is like a service. People like their work. It's like you're providing it an extra layer of service by taking the time to pre-build. And while it looks pretty and it makes their life a little bit easier, I do think to a degree it also paralyzes them into, putting them in a box. And I tend to think that you actually see more overuse, more overreaching with pre-built workouts than you ever have with simple transcript written, run easy, run hard, run moderate, bike easy, bike hard, bike moderate, because you can't, they can't cheat the feel as long as you're being honest with it. But the other stuff, you can force yourself into a pace or a power or a speed because you feel like you have to meet that demand. And I think that's problematic.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm with you on that. I was kind of thinking back to when you're talking about, when I first started with you and we were doing all those old, I didn't have a power meter. I didn't even have a Garmin that first year. And I was just trying to think back to, like how, and this has sort of been the baseline for how I think about all this stuff, is that I was looking for benchmarks along the way. Like when I started training for Ironman, there was like a 0% chance in my mind that I could actually do it, because of, I was 50 years old and I had never done any of this stuff. So we had gone through all these things. And I think back to like, with the open water swimming, right? We'd go out every morning and swim 100 hard or easy out and then 100 hard in or whatever. And then we'd take a little break and we'd do, a couple thousand in the open water, but we'd work at it. And then, but we did it, pretty consistently, like 2-3 days a week, right? For months. So that, going into that race, I really didn't have a ton of long swims, but so I was a little bit skeptical because I didn't know, right? And, but you knew. And then we went, and then I did Muncie that summer, I think in June or whatever, July. And that was my first half. And I remember going into that and like having doubts about that swim because, that was, kind of a long swim for me at the time. And it still is a long swim for me. But I remember thinking when I got done with that swim, when I hit that beach line, I'm like, okay, I can do Wisconsin now. Cause I felt like I had another lap in me. Right. So, but it was like a benchmark for sure. And I think, the week before we went out and ran that track workout where we negative split for like 13 straight miles, or we tried to do it without a watch. And
right. There was a penalty, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't there a penalty if you didn't?
I think it was lashes.
Yeah, it's lashes. You got 6 lashes to the back with the hammer gel.
Yeah, so you started that whole thing, and that's what I mean about like pacing, which was great to me. It was sort of like, all right, you better start at a place where you can keep getting lower. And we did, a mile at a time. I think we took 30 seconds or a minute between, and we did everything. And then we went out and ran 4 more laps, and it was, negative split the whole day. And that was maybe a week or 2 before that race. So that was the Muncie race. And then I hit that shoreline in the swim. I'm like, okay, I think I'm in a ballpark here, where I can actually do this Ironman swim. And then, of course, that run, we did I actually had a really good Muncie. It was like a really, I knew cycling was my thing. Oh, that was the other thing, is like we went out to the trace. So I knew the swim after that. I was like, okay, I'm in a spot where I can make that. And what I'm doing is the right way. Just keep doing what you're doing, get a little bit longer, whatever. And we went out to the trace and I kept bitching at you about like, I don't want to go 100. I don't want to go 100. And, cause we had been riding 70, 65, 70, 80 miles pretty hard, fairly consistently out there. And, that's pretty good landscape for Wisconsin, what I was doing that year. And that one day you dragged me to 100, and that certainly put me over the edge mentally, even though in my mind I'm like, well, I probably could do it if I had to do it. But that was definitely a good indicator. But that was it, that was the 100-mile ride. And then the running piece was that day at Muncie. I got out of the water and I ran that half marathon pretty well, but it hurt. But I knew that I was like, okay, I just ran a half marathon at pretty good clip. And it hurt every way. So I knew I could do it, but I knew I was going the right way, but it was all feel. Everything was feel. And, but just the nature of what we were doing, the swim in the open water hard, the riding the trace hard. And then every time I ran, even easy, it was just hills everywhere where I lived. So I was always hitting hills and doing hill repeats and things like that and just building that sort of way up. And to me, it's like, yeah, I think when you're saying like a lot of these pre-built workouts, you kind of create sort of like an overlap, like short-term goal after short-term goal, just to prove that you can do it all the time. And sometimes you lose, the big picture. And I think you can have it, but if you get too caught up in all the little nuances of things, you just got to kind of go out and do things and make it feel hard and think about what's going on. And I was thinking about, thinking about what you're doing and how it applies is how you learn. And when you learn and you really understand it and know it, then you don't have to think. And to me, that's the freedom in training and racing. I mean, it's like if you understand what you have been practicing and then you get out on the race course and you can apply it without overthinking. And, 9 times out of 10, like if I have an athlete that's really trying to push for the podium or that, my thing is always to get them out of their head, quit thinking so much, just to be free, because you have you've been working hard, you have the ability to do it. Now you just got to quit trying to, overthink everything that you're doing and just have to go out and move and flow and be free and just believe that, you've got it in you and you can trust your body. So you have to experiment and get to these places where you can understand and trust your body and put yourself in those situations, get through them. It's like, okay, I remember that, I used to do that all the time. Like, remember that time we rode out we were doing Louisville and you had a great idea. We'd park, it's like the first part of Louisville is 10 miles flat. So you're like, let's not go to the trace. Let's ride to the trace from this damn donut shop or wherever the hell we parked.
We parked at the bread and company, like NRC over in Belmead.
Yeah. So you're like, let's just ride out Highway 100 or whatever it is. And it was like no shoulder, fucking cars everywhere, but it was all flat all the way.
Rumble strips. I mean, the way back, it was like the most harrowing experience.
Yeah, but I mean, it sucked. But the reality of that is we did ride out and then we just started hitting hills just like Louisville, right? So we kind of mapped a simulation, and it was probably like 10 times as stressful on that flat, but you knew once you got to River Road in Louisville that, it was not going to be a problem. So I think that those types of things, to me, that's thinking, right? It's like all this, like, these, I don't know, man, the nuances of little things, whatever, just keep a big picture in mind and realize, like, it's always like, how do you apply or analogize how what you're doing today is going to impact a race? That was, I always used to do that on the runs. I'd be like, all right, long run, and I had 2 miles left. I'm like, how am I, like, I'm hurting, man, but the finish line is up there. So just put it in your head and just practice that last few miles to get home, as much as it hurts or doesn't feel good. Just start, bringing those pictures into your head and really kind of like visualizing. I mean, to me, that's how I visualize. I mean, people talk about just sit around and like think about their race all the time, but when you're in the training, it's a really great time to visualize stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can imagine how that might feel. Oh, this big gear grinder of a 6-minute grind is like just getting up the top of the hill, and then you get over it, and then all right, now you're recovering, so now you're going downhill. But just imagine that kind of stuff, on a trainer. I gotta say, when I try to cut back on my training, because I'm trying to create a longevity approach to my racing and stuff, when I just because of where I'm at now, it's a lot of flats, and for me, riding on the trainer actually is how I can get the most bang for my buck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think, like, it's funny you said that, because I think even as coaches, like, I know that for myself. Like, if I look back and I look at some of the fittest periods of time I've ever been in, yes, I was a little bit younger and more consistent for sure. But like all the stuff I did was on feel. Like you said, like you go out and we'd ride the trace. Some days we take it easy. Some days we'd like, hey, why don't we just do this hill for the next hour and a half, big gear up, easy back. There was no set time, no set rest, or we'd like go easy out and then see if we could beat our time back, sort of negative splitting, same thing with like, that track workout that we did, it was like stuff, I think just, because I too, like, as you were talking, I was like, yeah, like as you coach, you still get caught up in how to kind of layer what's available now and include what's relevant, and then, not include the things that are maybe too chaotic and causing too much interference. And the more questions you get as an athlete that are about, hey, like, I don't know what this feels like. Well, then maybe instead of more structure, you need less structure in what you're doing, and not being afraid. Because honestly, because most athletes are really, really smart, and I think they can be really, really in tune with their body. And honestly, the athletes that get the best performances week in and week out in training, year in and year out in racing, are the ones that know how to pace. And everything we do is about pacing, right? Knowing how long you can hold what for how long and what that feels like. Not what pace that is, but what that feels like. And I mean, I went out and that I have never been the most athletic. I've never been the fastest or had the most natural ability, but I have always felt like when I'm thinking my clearest, I'm always really, really good at pacing and just understanding my time from plot A, where we're starting, to plot Z to finish, and then how long it's going to take me to get there, and that what effort and pace and / speed I can maintain for the duration of that time. And I rarely ever blow up. I just know what feels like what, and I credit that to not like some intrinsic, ability, but just from growing up in the sport and having to feel everything out. So I know what it feels like. I went to the track to do a 5K Saturday morning just to kind of see where my fitness was at before I do a few different things with my training. And I haven't run a 5K in I don't know how long. And so I hopped in the track. It was dark outside, and I said, "All right, I'm just gonna hop out there, and you're gonna hold whatever you feel like you can hold." And I honestly thought like 6:55, 7:05s, like anything under 7 would have been pretty good for me at this point in my training, like where I'm at. And so I took out, and I was like, "You're not gonna look at your watch for the first 3 laps." And I went out and I ran the first lap, the first mile in at 6:40. And I feel like, all right, this is a pretty good spot. I think I can hold this. It wasn't like, all right, pull the cord. It was like, I think I can hold this for what I now know is going to be around a 21-minute 5K. And now the goal was just to not let go. And so first lap was 6:40. Second mile was 6:42. So I let go a little bit. But what I did was I knew that I couldn't throttle down anymore. So the risk was if I maintained, then I would know I would blow up. So I was like, all right, let's let up the gas. Not a lot, just enough of a smidge to where I know I can at least have the opportunity to do some kind of an emptying of the tank. So that round was 6:42, and then my last lap was 6:38. And the last like 0.10 was like whatever, 6:10, because you got 1/10 of a mile, you're just busting it. So basically, if you take the 3 miles, it was almost a perfect even split, like within 2 seconds. So like first lap was 6:40, average lap of the 3 miles was 3:40, average time for the whole thing was 6:39. And I was happy with the pace, but I was more happy with the fact that I was able to pace it basically dead even from start to finish. Now, could you argue like, yeah, you could have gone out way harder in the first minute, but that's where I was at. And you got to be able to do that from things as short as a 2 mile, 4 minute, 5 minute front of the bike, all the way up to a marathon. How do I think I can hold this? I mean, if I go back and look at maybe arguably my best endurance performance ever, definitely given where I was at in life, was the country music marathon. I was totally untrained for it. I had Achilles tendonitis. I was drinking, like I was still in my drinking days. So I was like consuming enormous amounts of alcohol. But I got it done. So I took the first half of that, and the first half is easier and the second half is hillier. And I just took the first half straight on feel. That was it. And I was like, my goal is to negative split this thing. I think I ran the first half in like a 150 or a 145. I don't know what it was. And then the last half, I just ripped off, I think one of my fastest half marathons, like in the low 130s, mid 130s, and felt incredible and just paced it perfectly. But none of it I went off my watch. I just went off like, all right, if I want to I'm not in shape. What's this going to feel like? This is going to be a 3.5 hour day. I know I got to get to the halfway mark with some fuel and with some, still some energy left in the legs. So it's got to feel like this. I just don't think we know what that feels like. And I do, like, I think that again, like as much as things have changed, I do think we have gotten in our way so much about, the specifics. And ultimately, to me, like as a coach, the most successful athletes are the ones that communicate effectively and leave comments and are consistent. The other stuff is is irrelevant until you get all that right. And then listening to your body, and understand that, hey, I had to really take it easy today, or I felt great today, so I pushed it. Like, there was never a time, I remember back when we were, doing all this training together, and we were, putting out some pretty good times. I don't think anyone ever stopped like, hey, I have to dial back the intensity here today, guys. I got to keep it up, 0.72 intensity factor. I got to get that green in Training Peaks. Or I'm going to go over today. It was just like, this feels good. Let's do this today, and let's go hard and let's feel it out. Or I don't feel good today, so I'm going to skip the first 2 hours and I'll come later. I just think that as much information as we have, it tends to get more in the way for a lot, not all athletes, but for a lot of athletes, instead of just, hey, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this, let's do that. And then let's see how you feel and what your body is telling you, and not what you're forcing your body to do. And then you learn that as you go, and you learn it, because again, like you, and I'm going to shut up, I swear, but because it's funny, right? When you read athletes' comments about, I wish I should have gone harder here, or I'm like, if it felt hard enough in the moment, it was hard enough. Like, it's always easy to second guess ourselves right when we're done. Like, I don't know that I pushed it hard enough. But in the moment, your body was obviously telling you, yeah, well, I think that was hard enough. Do some athletes probably played a little too close to the vest because they're afraid of what that pain feels like? Sure, but that's also because they don't know how to practice getting there on their own. They have to be forced there. But in a race, you have to be the one to make that decision. Like, how much pain can I be in, and how long can I be in it for? Power meter dies, heart rate monitor goes out. It's up to you. You got to be able to run this race at that field for this period of time, and you got to know that. And so I just think it's something that we have to continue to drill in as coaches, and stand by the desire and the ability and the want to educate and not educate, empower athletes to know their body and feel their body and understand their body, and look for signs, look for signals, look for sirens, like what's going poorly, or look for, superpowers. On the days they feel like champions, be a champion. Don't be constrained to the interval. And on the days you don't feel like a champion, do what you need to do to make yourself feel better for the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's huge, man. I mean, again, it kind of goes back to really figuring out what the long-term plan is, and instead of just getting wrapped up in the moment, it's sort of like stuck in the moment, I guess, if I may quote you too. It's sort of like Will Emery said that. That's just like always been the thing when he talked about race and Ironman. He said, never believe how you feel. And I think that can be pulled into training a little bit too. It's sort of like, if you get in, you think you feel great, and you're going to go hammer it, and you don't feel great, don't believe either one of those. You got to kind of feel it out, and just sort of adjust as you go. And you might not feel like doing a workout, and we've seen it a million times. I didn't feel like it, but man, when I got out there, I felt great. And then, just trust that. Realize everything's an ebb and flow, including training and racing. So it's just kind of being, like you're saying, really in touch and in tune with who you are and what your body is and what it's saying, and trust in that.
Mm-hmm. You got to trust in it. Trust yourself. Trust yourself this weekend. Good luck to all of your teams. Unless they're Kentucky, then I hope you guys lose. As always, we love you guys. We appreciate you. Go to our website, c26triathlon.com, and is our one-stop shop for all things coaching, camps, and community. If you need anything from Mike, he's available. Mike at c26triathlon.com. Or if you need anything me specifically, Robbie at c26triathlon.com.
All right, dude. Good luck with the vols, man. I will be, I guess I'll be watching. Cable's going out in 2 weeks.
All right, dude. See you, buddy.
All right, man. See you.